Hi, so this is another video on the Business Casual Yogi, and now we're up to Chapter 1, Life Out of Balance. So I'm glad you read, and if you haven't, please do read the foreword, the preface, and the intro in this book. It is actually quite important so that you have the right framework of how to approach the book, but also it gives you some tips in order to, how to implement the stuff in the book. So chapter 1 is Life Out of Balance, and at first, when I first wrote this chapter, I was my intention was to make a commentary of the way life is today, our modern life, our modern world, the pressures that we're faced, especially if we're working, commuting, and dealing with, all the multiple facets of our life, how stressful that is, and all the things that are going on with our psychology in that process of managing day-to-day existence. And the commentary I thought was very good and very related to what is in reality. And after many conversations with clients as well as friends and colleagues in the business world. But as I first read it, the publishing house, the editor, came back to me and said, it was actually not the editor, it was the associate publisher who said, this can end up being a chapter that's a little depressing, And even though the whole book is positive as a whole, it's a very positive book, the first chapter kind of is a bit of a downer. It's like, okay, here's all the things that are wrong with life. And part of the reason for setting that up was to say that, look, for all the things that are going on in our modern world, yoga literally is the antidote to that existence. So by incorporating some of the framework and philosophies of yoga, we can balance and heal from the things that are thrown at us on a daily basis. But the thing is, the solution didn't come till later in the chapter. And so the associate publisher, Philip, specifically asked, can we get this in earlier so that we interject and intersperse some positivity throughout chapter 1. And so that's how chapter 1 came to be, is that we'd have some commentary on stress levels and burnout and income needs and keeping up with the Joneses and all that kind of situation, but also offer little bits and hints of how yoga might help make that better and how the teachings of the book will help that. So that's how that came about. The other very interesting thing is in chapter 1, a tip from public speaking is when you get up on stage and you speak to an audience, you want to start with a story, a real personal story that really helps you personally connect to the audience. And so that's what I did in the book, to start out the story started the book with a story. And it was a story about somebody that I and Vishwaketu met at a yoga retreat. So we were at Bhakti Fest, a yoga festival, and it's this huge festival in Joshua Tree, California. And we met this guy, and you'll read about the story of this interaction, how it really shocked me that this man, wasn't doing anything with his life, but he seemed so serene and so happy and so content. So I was, curious, like, how does that happen? How does somebody who isn't, working like the rest of us have such serene happiness? And, when I first wrote that story, it had a lot of imagery in it. It's sort of like what you learned in grade school about writing, imagery, texture, really bring the story to life. And so I talked about all the things, what the cafeteria was like, and the sounds and plates and forks and knives and the other yogis that were there and the conversations that were happening and, description about what this man looked like. And of course, when the red lines came back in copy editing, a lot of it was crossed out, and I was sort of upset. I was like, why did you cross all this stuff out? This is, the crux of it. It's very important to share these details so we can paint the picture for that reader to really, feel like they were there. And what I realized is, part of the editor's job is to make sure that my voice and my intention really shines through, and almost clearing the clutter of the words so that the voice shines through. And by clearing out a lot of this imagery and texture that I thought was important, it actually made the story come to life in an even more powerful and impactful way. And the best analogy I can think is sort of like when you watch a movie. So let's say you read a book, you love the book. Then you watch the movie, and the movie just doesn't do justice to what you saw, what you read in the book, and the feeling you had. And the reason is the movie makers, they're trying to cram the story into an hour and a half, 2 hour slot, first of all. But the other thing is, they paint the picture for you. They spoon feed you the details and what that story is. And so your imagination sort of doesn't have the activity that it had when it was reading the book. And so when you read the book, your imagination creates this amazing world that is right for you, that creates this very powerful emotional experience that the movie just can't match. So the same thing here, when I accepted all these red line edits and the story become much less cluttered with words, you as a reader, when you read the story, you create in your imagination an individualized experience of what that experience was, and it becomes very memorable, very relevant, very powerful. And the purpose of the stories in the book is to teach a particular lesson or a particular insight. And so by you having an individualized experience of what that was, it's much more powerful. And so this story actually came out beautifully. And so now when I read the story, I'm transported to a beautiful place in a much more powerful way than I was before, with all the words that were sort of an attempt to create imagery, which wasn't necessary here. So you'll enjoy that first story of meeting Cartoon Baba. And then as we go through it, we talk a lot about some of the research that has come up. And I was fascinated with some of this research, the amount that we check our phones every day and what impact that has on us. The similarity between the dopamine hit from phones and cocaine and heroin was fascinating. And then, of course, one of Vishwa's favorite stories around, trying to buy bagels in Canada. That's a classic that he tells almost at every yoga retreat that he does. And then, of course, we get into where yoga came from and what a broader system it is and all the things that it can do for you. And I'm still continually intrigued and fascinated with these seers, or they call them rishis, but these ancient people at the foothills of the Himalayas, 5,000, 10,000 years ago, that came up with this system of understanding our human existence. Like, who are we? What are we? Where do we come from? These existential questions. And then how do we take care of ourselves? How do we have a journey through life of more happiness? And what does that all mean? And these are the people who developed the system of yoga, the system of the Vedic philosophy, Ayurveda, the mind-body medicine system, Jyotish, the study of astrology. In a very accurate way, these people figured a lot of insights out. And you'll see in modern religions and modern frameworks, modern systems, they've all sort of borrowed from these original set of teachings, borrowed in a lot of ways corrupted. And so what I'm trying to do in this book and with Vishwaketu's help is go back to the original source and really communicate the intention of these teachings, because they're very powerful in their original unmodified form. These were teachings that were handed down in oral tradition for thousands of years till about 6,000 BC, and around that time, thousands of years after the traditions were first developed, were written down in written form in books called the Vedas. And what's interesting is this is massive amounts of texts. I mean, the Vedas as a series of books would cover an entire library of knowledge. And so there's knowledge in there that is still yet to be discovered and understood. And from what you've discovered so far, it's been very powerful for human transformation in the modern age. And as scientific tools are improving, they're starting to validate and prove a lot of the insights that these people in ancient India, or ancient Indus River civilization, pre-India, had 6,000 years ago. So I hope you enjoyed chapter 1, and I'll be back with a video on chapter 2 as I get through that. Thank you.